Hello, my name is Davy Jones, and welcome to another edition of Listen Up's Drive-Through Bible School series. Today, we're going to continue our study on Darwin's Migraine, why evolution cannot be trusted as science, and that creation is the only logical explanation for all that exists and why it exists. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 different reasons that give evolutionists a really hard time. Really, these are tremendous and powerful strikes against evolution. They cannot be explained by evolutionists. It causes them tremendous problems from which they try to work around philosophically, but certainly cannot scientifically. It's amazing. You're over the abyss of hell and you're still holding on to something that cannot save. And this is what evolution provides. Its tentacles reach into almost every aspect of our lives these days, sadly. So let me get into this. So in my last video, I gave you an overview of evolution as an opponent of biblical creationism. And today we're going to look at the 5 very serious problems with evolution that gives Darwin and all other evolutionists a migraine, because he's easily, confidently, and powerfully destroy the false claims of evolutionary biology and philosophy, rendering this humanistic religion a complete waste of time. Something from nothing. I've heard of a show about nothing, but can something really come from nothing? Think about it logically. Well, you can't. That's part of the problem. But like with all things evolution, those who ascribe to it keep hoping. So it is just like the rest of us did as kids, that the Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, and even Santa Claus was real. At some point, a child looks at the evidence, and even in their own limited intellectual development, can see that these characters are but myths meant to tell a story and are not existing in fact. Not so ironically, this is what many accuse those who hold on to a belief system that is the Bible do. They accuse us of holding on to fairy tales and myths. I see it all the time. I hear it all the time in my discussions with people. And they mock and they laugh, but you kind of get them in a conversation about some of the elements of what they believe. They have no answers. It's a moral issue. It's a religious issue. It's a self-God issue. So imagine, if you will, somebody saying that everything came from nothing. Just think about that. So there's nothing. So there's not something like here that suddenly becomes out here. There's just nothing. No time, space, matter. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. It's not logical. So imagine a junkyard, if you will, out in Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, and it is loaded with old airplane parts. Now, suddenly a twister appears and runs right through the junkyard, spinning wildly and violently as it passes through, lifting up from the junkyard 1 million pieces of old airplanes. And while it turns, spectators off in the distance see something that appears to be forming in its midst. As the twister loses momentum and dissipates, it drops to the ground, a fully functioning 747, all gassed up and ready to fly to all points around the globe. Now, for the universe to just appear in an orderly fashion and work harmoniously out of nothing, it would seem more rational that the 747 story would be more possible. Yet, to take this story even further, let's say that junkyard had only parts of old rusted cars and still produce the same result, a fully functioning 747. Well, we wouldn't be getting closer to the statistical probability of certainty, more so than even the universe forming perfectly functioning out of nothing. Yet we'd still be required in that scenario to have 1 million to the 10th of zeros in terms of rational probability for that to actually be able to occur. The faith necessary for this is light years beyond what it takes to consider the workings of nature and believe that it was created by a being outside of space, time, and matter, and with and for a purpose. Oh, and before you ask, well, where did God come from? That's something I hear all the time. We get to this point where they're confounded in the discussion about, well, something can't come from nothing. Then their next thing is, well, where did God come from? Well, the answer falls easily within the bounds of logic that you can learn at most universities, at least Logic 101, where even many evolutionists and philosophers have, after they swallow hard, concluded that there is a God. That if there is a God, rather, it would have to be an uncreated creator for all this to happen. Yes, I said uncreated creator. Sounds like our God, God of the Bible, is eternal without beginning or end, doesn't it? To believe otherwise sure takes a lot of faith. So next, let's talk about the primordial soup. And out of nowhere, there came a universe working immediately in harmony with gravity and all other mechanisms required for the universe not to collapse on itself in a heartbeat. So in keeping with that thinking, evolutionists teach dogmatically that a primordial soup existed in which all life is derived. Of course, this is mere speculation based on the fact that there isn't a shred of evidence for this soup now or in any natural or biological history that we've seen. Nobody was there to see it, so there's no witness. It's not replicatable in any lab, not to this point, and never will be. See, the soup had water. So where do the molecules come from that created that water? If from all life came one cell, and it was in a soup that had water, where did the soup come before this? It starts to get... Now I'm getting Darwin's migraine, but in a different way. You see, where did the molecules come from that created the water? You mean there was a perfect environment that remained constant without wild fluctuations, mind you, in weather and temperature to bring forth that first cell. No sudden freeze to kill it off. No incredible heat to do the same or any other radical fluctuation in the environment that might have killed it off. And then it remained harmonious for billions of years for life to form and evolve. Imagine that. Now, cells are highly complex organisms. How did the information get into that cell that drove it organically to split and become a second cell? Where did the DNA come from? How about the membrane that protects it from damaging outside influences, etc., etc., etc.? Experiments have continued in university labs around the world from the 50s onward in trying to create light from different gases, fabricated lightning strikes, and more. Yet they can't even get into first gear. They can't, and they won't, because they have to assume too much about this primordial soup, as they have zero evidence for it. Again, to believe in a primordial soup takes a lot of, altogether now, faith. Unguided chemical processes and the genetic code. It gets really messy here for the evolutionist. Starting with something coming from nothing and yet having no information, or having information as like DNA, these cells begin to become more and more complex. Single cells to humans, for instance, we are made up of trillions of cells, with natural selection taking over to determine which cells would exist best in the environment to help the organism grow. Well, back to Logic 101. What guiding tool would these unintelligent cells use to determine which are best, which takes judgment for proliferation and survival of the species? Question mark. Unguided chemical processes seem utterly ridiculous for numerous reasons. Back then, as we have now, the second law of thermodynamics was in existence. It was at work. And it shows all that exists is in a state of entropy, of falling apart. Of course, we've seen all the pictures of our parents when they were younger, and now as they're older in their twilight years, they're falling apart. You probably wake up every morning and feel like you're falling apart a little bit more too. I certainly do. I just turned, well, I won't tell you. Anyway, we've been dying from the moment that we were born, and we're on that train. We're on that train towards death. We're falling apart. There isn't a fountain of youth. I've been to St. Augustine. I drank the water. See, scientific labs around the world have tried to create RNA, which is like DNA, which carries a genetic code. But it's impossible with the technology we have now to even come close to being able to construct one RNA. Did that primordial soup have better technology than we have today? How then did the genetic code develop on its own? And where did the information come from, each that stores within its structure? Information necessary for it to create something specifically is an absolute necessity for all life. The DNA of a mouse is different from a sperm whale, which is different from a T-Rex, which is different from a human. The fact that DNA exists is proof that that it was intentionally put there by a creator for the purpose of creating unique creatures and all else that lives on this planet. One final thought here. Back in my day, we played our music from vinyl records, child of the 70s. We'd buy the record, but then would need to have a record player on which to play it, or the record would be useless. Now, what if the record had the information embedded in it that would explain how to create a record player? How would we ever know, since we wouldn't be able to play the record to find out? It's obvious. Both would have to be created independently of each other, but with each other in mind for both to fulfill its design. An unguided process creating intelligence and forming all life takes an insane amount of faith. Gotta freshen up. Random mutations. Random mutations can't choose which genetic information to use if no intelligence exists by which to guide its intellectual process. How could random selection have possibly known, understood, or identified the right cells from which to build a highly complex animal or plant? You see, these questions alone demand a measure of intelligence to make sure each building block that is made chooses the right path. We've already seen that a wrong mutation dies, is a deadly aberration, which speaks to the survival of the fittest. Well, how did this one cell know to become two? What information was embedded in it that would cause it to know it needed to grow in complexity? How did that information get there? I'll never forget a biology professor at my university telling the class that beings developed eyes in an evolutionary process because they knew it needed to see. Kids were going, ooh, ah. I raised my hand as the troublemaker I've been known to be and asked, okay, then how did these beings in their development know it needed to develop a brain before it had a brain to know it needed one that it would then know it needed to develop eyes? Well, he looked at me and shrugged his shoulders, and then I had one girl in the class yell at me, "Keep your religion to yourself, you hateful person." All right, well, I stopped there, but easily could have continued asking questions along that line of reasoning. Okay, yeah, I could have been snarky, asking, did this one being go to a conference or a symposium, write research papers or peer reviews to share with other beings in evolutionary development who are also trying to evolve a brain and an eye? But I didn't. I guess another question I could have asked would have been, well, what came first? The mouth, the stomach, or the sprint to the bathroom? Seems each would have had to have been created simultaneously, but separately, for the organ or the organism would die. Again, more faith required. All right, number 5. Here, the flagellum. There are 3 types of flagellum, but surely a funny sounding word it is, flagellum. It's an astonishing mechanism with even more astonishing responsibility in each sperm cell. Imagine, if you will, a little rotary engine with an outboard motor that looks like a tail racing around a bacterial cell in your body, with a purpose as a delivery system. Now, this is a flagellum, and it has a tail like an engine that powers the flagellum around a chematoxis. I have such a hard time saying that word, chemataxis apparatus that determines which direction the little boat, flagellum, is to go. In the case of humans, they're found in male sperm. Why is this important? Because the sperm needs a delivery system that will be able to cause it to swim a relatively long distance through the vagina to meet the female egg so that fertilization occurs. It has intuitively within it programmed to go a certain direction. It's not swimming away, it's swimming towards, and whoever's the Michael Phelps of that sperm gets there first. He's the lucky one. So until this flagellum is developed, how do we ever procreate? Seems like a huge amount of faith is needed to believe it just happened. And with that, look for us for part 3 of the Darwin's Migraine series. I'll have 5 more for you next video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button now, along with the notifications button to be alerted to when new videos are released. Also, the like button helps us get out to more people in YouTube land. God bless you. Thank you for sharing time with me. I hope this has been a blessing to you and has honored God.